Graziano, ti chiederei di staccare lo schermo, se possibile.
Ma mi sentite?
Sì, sì, ti sentiamo.
Come ci organizziamo? Lanciate voi il tutto?
Sì, non ti preoccupare, io ti do la parola e ora no, riattiva lo schermo tra l'altro perché devi parlare, perdonami, stavo solo facendo delle prove.
C'est fait, le streaming est ouvert, vous pouvez y aller.
Wait, Professor Ernst, are you ready? Can we start or do you need more time?
Yeah. Just speak auf jetzt an.
Okay, die Office-Haltung, genau. Okay, here I am. Buongiorno.
Buongiorno, it's a pleasure.
Yeah.
So,
tu comincia.
grazie.
Lei comincia. Oh, Ja, lasst uns jetzt überraschen.
Un secondo che devo riuscire a capire com'è. Ah, ecco qua. Alors, salut, bonjour à tout le monde, j'espère que vous m'entendez. Bonjour à vous qui êtes connectés avec nous ici sur Zoom et bonjour à le public qui nous suivent sur la page du collège et sur la page YouTube. Et, bienvenue à la première séance du nouveau cycle de séminaires sur les technologies de la visibilité. Et just a few remarks for the English speakers. There will be a very, very short introduction in French, and after we will switch to English, so please bear with us. Alors, une petite introduction au cycle de séminaire. Le cycle fait partie d'une ligne de recherche plus générale sur l'anthropologie des images numériques. Et le projet est coordonné par le département humanisme numérique du Collège de Bernardins en partenariat avec l'Université de Turin et avec la collaboration scientifique de l'Université de Lyon 3. Et avant de vous donner des petites informations sur les séminaires organisatifs et de présenter notre intervenant d'aujourd'hui, je voudrais laisser la parole à Graziano Lingua pour un salut d'accueil. Graziano Lingua est professeur de philosophie à l'Université de Turin et co-directeur du département. Et il est aussi le coordinateur responsable du projet Anthropologie des images numériques. Graziano, la parole est à toi. Merci.
Merci Alessandro. Bonjour à tous et à toutes. Donc, je suis très heureux de commencer cette seconde partie de notre édition 2020 du séminaire Anthropologie des images numériques. Alessandro l'a déjà dit, ce séminaire est le produit d'une collaboration de différentes universités. Et je suis très heureux de commencer avec une intervention du professeur Ernst, qui est sans doute une des figures les plus remarquables du débat contemporain sur les médias dans le contexte numérique. Juste deux mots qui me semblent importants, deux aspects qui me semblent importants de ce séminaire. Dans ce séminaire, d'un point de vue de contenu, nous avons privilégié l'utilisation de paradigmes historiques et conceptuels pour thématiser des aspects de la théorie de l'image contemporaine. De là vient le sous-titre de ce cycle, de l'image ancienne à l'image hypermoderne. Parce que dès sa première édition, en 2019, le but a été d'utiliser les ressources de l'histoire de la théorie de l'image. En particulier, c'était les ressources de l'histoire de la théorie de l'image ancienne du christianisme, pour chercher de nouvelles perspectives sur la nature particulière des images numériques et sur l'anthropologie des images à l'ère que nous appelons hypermoderne. L'autre aspect très important de ce séminaire, c'est l'aspect méthodologique. Nous avons privilégié une approche interdisciplinaire grâce à la participation de philosophes, de théologiens, d'historiens des idées et de la culture, de théoriciens des médias et des chercheurs d'autres disciplines. C'est là le contexte dans lequel se situe l'intervention d'aujourd'hui. Bon, je donne la parole à Alessandro De Cesari pour introduire le professeur Ernst. Et merci.
Merci Graziano. Oui, je me présente aussi, je m'appelle Alessandro De Cesari, je suis chercheur à l'Université de Turin et au Collège de Bernardins et j'aurai le plaisir et l'honneur de modérer la séance d'aujourd'hui. I will now switch to English and just a few small things for the participants before starting. So first of all, you are kindly asked to turn off your screens and microphones when you are not speaking. So that would be great so that we can all see Professor Ernst and maybe his presentation. Second thing, after the presentation, of course, there will be space for a debate with our guest. And for those of you who are following on YouTube, there will be the possibility to write questions and commentaries. My colleague Jacopo Bodini will gather them and transmit them to us. So don't be shy. And now I can finally have the pleasure of introducing our speaker for today, Professor Wolfgang Ernst. Professor Ernst is professor of Medienwissenschaften, a term which will be quite difficult to translate in French, but let us say media theory in English. He teaches at the Humboldt-Universität zu Berlin, and he is one of the prominent, as Graziano already said, one of the most important media theoreticians in today's international debate. He is also one of the major exponents of the methodology known as media archaeology, and his research interests are, of course, really vast, but some focuses are the notion of archive, the relationship between technology, memory, and time, and what we could call sonic media. Professor Ernst, I would like to thank you very much for being with us today. The title of your paper is The Image Function or the Oxymoron of Digital Visibility. The stage is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Graziano Lingua and Alessandro De Cesaris for this introduction. And thank you for giving me the opportunity now to extend some thoughts and to radicalize some thoughts on the digital image, which I had originally developed for the Cuneo Summer School Conference and will now be happy to extend. I'm actually talking to you here from the media theater of media science department of Humboldt-Universität. That gives me the feeling to give a public lecture. I'm standing here like I give my weekly lectures to students, and I'm in the media theater. I'm not at home office, so I feel much more relaxed talking to you in this way. And of course, this is a telematic conference, a telematic lecture on streaming audio and streaming video. And this is, of course, due to the pandemic situation. But of course, we are already within the digital image. I'm not simply talking about the digital image, but everything I say and everything you see and hear from me is already part of a digital image transmission. So I am we are all within the subject of the digital image already, which is a problem, because normally when we are sitting in a real presence university or conference room, like students and colleagues in this media theater, there is a distance. There is a distance between our bodily form of conversation, of doing academic research in a privileged, closed space where we have the privilege to develop thoughts in a free way. Now this is different. Suddenly we are public. We are connected to the world in a way, to the digital internet world. So we are already part of the digital image. So how to keep a distance? That is why I actually printed my thoughts out on paper. You see, I will now read from paper parts of what I say, not from a computer monitor, because I need a critical distance in order to reflect about the digital image from a non-digital point of view. So these were my preliminary thoughts. Again, my subject is the image function, or the oxymoron of the digital visibility. In the notorious final remarks of his book, Order of Things, Michel Foucault, and of course, Foucault resonates. I was supposed to talk in Paris originally. Michel Foucault, at the end of his book, predicts that the image of the human will disappear like the shape of a human face drawn into the sand at the seashore. In times of highly integrated microcomputer chips, this sand is literally silicon, which dissolves the image of man by calculation, literally counting with calculi, that is, counting with pebbles. So what has been a metaphor for Foucault suddenly becomes literal in digital image transmission. Against this post-human vision, man nowadays finds him or herself in a slightly different situation, in which the pandemic coronavirus crisis has pushed the digitalization, how is it called, of communication in favor of a home office video conferencing and academic online teaching. The corporal image of man reappears on computer screens, but temporarily disappears in the actual medium channel. Foucault's apocalyptic metaphor becomes micro-temporalized by actual computing, which is recording, transduction, processing, transmission, and storage of man as data face, which you see on the so-called interface. Such an imaging, because it's an active process, it's dynamic, it's not simply an image, it's a permanent processing of data, it's an imaging in the active sense. Such an imaging is only apparently about visibility anymore. The digital image is an oxymoron. It is either not digital or it is not an image. The general theme of the Deaf Media Art Festival at Rotterdam in 2003 has been data knitting. And the subject of this former conference reminded of the first digital image production by the Jacquard loom in France around 1800, which provided the idea for Charles Babbage's first computer design. A media archaeological precursion of Foucault's end of human metaphor is a proto-digital image which has been woven à la mémoire in memory of Joseph-Marie Jacquard indeed, where the portrait of the inventor of the image weaving machine becomes an image function of his own invention, and his so-called memory is a function of this stored program device. Maybe we can now show this portrait of Jacquard, of which I'm talking. You see now this picture of the inventor of the textile image weaving machine, Jacquard. On the one hand, this is a digital reproduction, because what you see now is a digital reproduction. The image from an image from which is in real in the collection of the Science Museum in London. If you enlarge this image now on your computer, it would itself dissolve into pixels. You see on the left side, the hands of Jacquard are connected to a weaving mechanism. I actually spontaneously brought a toy from our media archaeological funders, which is a weaving mechanism. We have this in our collection of media archaeological objects, where you can actually weave a textile image and not simply theoretically know about it, but practically do it. This brings me back to the image which you now, thank you, which you now see. You see a portrait of Jacquard, the inventor of the textile image producing machine, and the image itself is woven on that machine. So it's digital in many sense. But who is the actual artist of this image? Michel-Marie Carquillat is the weaver, the tisseur who has woven this portrait. D'après Claude Bonnefond, who did the original design of this portrait. The real agency of this image, though, is the machine. Since this portrait of Jacquard was woven in silk on a Jacquard loom and required 24,000 punched cards to create in 1839. It was only produced to order. Charles Babbage owned one of those portraits, and this inspired him of using perforated punched cards to design his first proto-digital computer, the analytical engine. So, textile imagery, we can now put off. Textile imagery that was created by the Jacquard loom was derived from punched cards, which literally informed the weaving of images. Just like the musical role in the player piano informs music. Charles Babbage contained the punched card-based woven portrait of Jacquard in his office, while applying the punched card for numerical computing himself. So a digitally woven image becomes the inspiration for the digital computer. This operational generalization of the mechanic agency of image production in reverse transformed the ontological state of the so-called image itself. Actually, once you experimentally weave an image in textile, you suddenly go through a process where you have no image idea anymore, but you do a step-by-step discrete operation. The automatization and mathematization of this pre-digital image production, independent of the artist's hand, that's important. Once the punched cards are in the machine does it autonomously. There is no more artistic human subjective hand, no painter. This completely interrupts the relation between human image recognition on the one side and its internal machine vision, in quotation, on the other side. Does the machine, while weaving such a portrait, have a vision, question mark, there is no such thing like the computational image phenomenology, or to call it with colleague Ian Bogarst, at least that would be a so-called alien phenomenology from the point of view of the machine. There can be no anthropology of the digital image, since the digital in the becoming of such images is excluded from human visual perception. And Ada Lovelace, the contemporary of Charles Babbage, in her notes on this first computer, the analytical engine, she pointed to its quality of computationally weaving what she called algebraic patterns. So suddenly the weaving mechanism of the textile image becomes a mathematical procedure, algebraic patterns woven by the computer. That's Ada Lovelace's terms. At that moment, the mechanism became transvisual, and images only remain a mere subgroup of numerical data processing. In Martin Heidegger's philosophical sense, the visual image disappears into the Cartesian world picture, Weltbild, which is not an image anymore, it's a mathematical matrix. Literally, the Cartesian grid, which is actually what you do while weaving. The Cartesian grid, which is machine vision as a function of the numerical measuring scientific approach to the world. And actually there is some research done that the origin of mathematical numerical reasoning in ancient Greece was developed by the weaving practice, which is a binary practice at all. In textile image processing, the fabrication of the tissue, just like with electronic pixel images nowadays, follows a pre-structuring by lines, columns, and punctual elements. So it's a matrix. Such image weaving operations result from the economy within the machine, which is thereby technological. It's both a material technique and a logical symbolic operation. This comes together. Whereas Babbage, for his analytical engine, this famous first programmable computer, while Babbage was inspired by the image producing Jacquard loom as a programmable mechanism to calculate textile patterns. Later, the number crunching machine, which we call computer, in reverse, produces images from numbers. This kind of recursive Möbius loop is the time figure of media archaeology. There's not a development, a linear development from the ancient image weaving practice to the painterly image, finally to the computer image, but there is a recursion, which I now describe. Alternative to the traditional cultural historiography in terms of evolution, development, or progress. Therefore, the media historical view, as it is suggested in the subtitle of our conference, Technologie de la visibilité, now the subtitle, de l'image ancienne à l'image hypermoderne. I'm a bit critical of this subtitle because instead of this linearity, which is suggested by de, à, from, to, this is opposed to, for example, media philosophers Wilhelm Flusser's understanding of the digital image, which is not the end of a historical development, but again, a recursion, a coming back of the iconoclastic textualization of the prehistoric image, as Flusser describes it in his book, which is called Into the Universe of Technical Images. And I remember it was actually in Paris on a conference on the end of history that I first met Wilhelm Flusser. I have very vivid memory of this privileged encounter. There is rather a technologos at work here, which can be media epistemologically specified down to its technological components, which is material hardware on the one hand and mathematical software. I actually feel like writing this word here, technologos. I try here to do a slightly different reading of the common term technology. Even if the human visual impression is the essential purpose for most image producing technologies, like this camera, the purpose of the technology of this camera, of these channels and cables until it arrives on your screen and the servers in between, all those mechanisms, the purpose is to produce what humans perceive as an image. But the actual event of optical signal transduction, which takes place now at that very moment, and digital signal processing, if we look at what actually happens in between the camera lens and your computer screen, what happens in between? This reminds of a completely different inner technological insight into what we still call an image. Suddenly the image is not there, but something is done with the image. And at the same time, it dissolves the image. It's specific. So the real media moment of the digital image is that it is not an image in the moment of transmission and calculation and processing. It is never an image there. Its specific configurations reveal a different kind of media phenomenology. So it's not human phenomenology of the image anymore, it's a media phenomenology, which is a different kind of thing or dynamics. Media archaeology looks at digital image not iconologically, like art history practices it, Panofsky and others, but media archaeology looks at digital images not iconologically, but log-iconically. I hereby use a word which was created, a neologism, by Francesco Striano in his brilliant recent dissertation, which will be published soon. What I call the cold archaeological gaze recognizes the digital images, the image format, as a border-defined function of data manipulation. Once optical signals have been sampled into the digital regime by analog to digital converters, because this takes place in our live stream now, or when it is even born algorithmically, because there are digital images which have never been optical. They are produced by the algorithm itself, like the punched cards of the Jacquard loom. Images thus become calculable rather than narratable. They can only be counted, not described in narrative terms anymore. That brings us a bit to the limits of a talk about the digital image. Media archaeology addresses the technical aspects of the image in its state as a medium. So media archaeology tries to really think the digital image as a medium. But even the term technical image, which is used by Flusser and others, is actually misleading, since technology does not know images in the human sense. I repeat this again and again because it is my main thesis for this talk. let the image rather be defined mathematically as a real valued function of two real variables. That would be a precise definition of the digital image. And suddenly the word image disappears. There is a real valued function of two real variables. So does the so-called image therefore make sense in its double sense, because it's human senses and meaning, only for human phenomenology? Or is there something like an alien image phenomenon from the technical side? Has the technique itself any idea of an image? The term picture suggests a flat object whose appearance varies from point to point. That is how informatics would define the so-called image. This variation has been a perceptual function of human vision so far, but now returns from within technology, where a spatial distribution, because for humans, images are mainly two-dimensional spatial distributions, but from within technology and electronics and computing, it becomes radically temporalized, because the image is dissolved into step-by-step, pixel by pixel, which is processed in the von Neumann architecture sequentially. That, of course, reminds of 18th century Gotthold Ephraim Lessing's treatise on the Laokoon, where he radically makes a difference between the spatial two-dimensional image and the temporalized sequence, which is for him more literature. Suddenly, for the computer, what we call an image is closer to literature. It's processing of word by word, byte by byte, bit by bit. With electronic television, it has been the human eye only which finally integrates the flying spot emanating from the cathode ray tube into an impression of what we call an image. Still, a machine can capture the same image without any consciousness or experience of the visual form. The question, therefore, is there something like the technologically implicit image? There is no anthropomorphic idea of the image for technology, but is there something like an implicit imagery within technology? Question mark. The quote, digital image, unquote, is an oxymoron. It is, I repeat this term by colleague Striano, a log icon, a logical icon. When we process pictures by digital computers, we usually want to regard them as discrete arrays of numbers. That is, as matrices rather than as functions. Such a picture function will be called a digital picture function. I hereby quote one of the informatics books on digital imagery. The Turing machine is not part of sensorial media anymore. That makes the computer so different from other so-called optical media or acoustic or audio media. This makes a techno-epistemic rather than media phenomenological analysis mandatory. The intervention of computation into technical image storage and transmission is not related to any kind of bodily sensation anymore, which gets lost in the moment of analog to digital conversion. But it is rather linked to the reasoning mind. And the reasoning mind, of course, here is not the human one, but the algorithm of computing. A media epistemic rupture occurs when analog optical images become binary data. This refers to its technologos rather than to its material medium quality. The ubiquitous digitization of signal transmission in communication does not change the electrophysical quality of the media channel itself, but the essence of its modulation. Now I try to make a difference between the analog media electric image and the digital one. While the analog electronic transduction of optical into electric signals, like in television and video, preserves its indexical trace, and in its quasi-photographic punctum, to use Roland Barthes' term, still remains intact. Digitization, on the other hand, is a translation. It's not a transduction, it's a translation, allowing for a conceptual abstraction into mathematical intelligence. So the fact that I'm now at this moment digitally communicated to you cuts me off from the indexical authenticity which an analog video camera still would have, or an analog microphone would still preserve. So in a way, I'm not in touch with you anymore. I'm abstracted visually and verbally and recomposed. So we are really far away, different from the closeness of live transmission in analog signal transmission. In a double existence, there is still the signal in the physical sense, even with digital media, but the expression of l'image numérique, like in France it is called, by Bernard Stiegler and others, this expression actually dissimulates the material embodiment of the computation number, the bit, in actual computing. Because the digital image is not digital, it's physical, even in the so-called digital transmission. Still, in terms of information theory, the physical signal is endowed with a second conceptual virtual body, which allows for its metamorphosis in an image, not for direct human view, but as second-order imagination. I now use the term which Wilhelm Flusser applies to the technical or the digital image. He says this is not about image, it's imagination, but in the most precise technical sense of data processing, which replaces traditional visual aesthetics by histograms, which, for example, calculate the entropy value, that is the information of a digitized image. So suddenly we have words from thermodynamics and other areas which measure the value, the information value of what we call an image. It's a completely different way of looking at an object which for the computer is not an image anymore. With its double techno and logical digitization, the so-called image not only loses its optical aspect, because it becomes abstracted, like it was in analog transmission before, but its indexical quality is lost as well. Or rather, it is retained in a different formation, as it has been coined as diagrammatic iconicity by Charles Peirce. That would be a lecture of its own to say, what does he mean by diagrammatic iconicity? So he already replaces the image by a different dynamical term. And so my analysis is, on the one hand, restricted to technically processed images, which only that justifies their definition as a medium, different from other forms of image formations, which are cultural techniques. A painting is a cultural technique, but I radically make a difference to the technological quotation image. For the technical image, first of all, it requires actual and active media matter, which is non-visual, non-optical electronics. And it requires digital signal processing as precondition as precondition to finally unfold at all as so-called images for the final human perception. But even that is not the end, because it's not only humans anymore which finally perceive the transmitted digital image. It's non-human computers as well, which are the address of image transmission, like in automated drone flight attacking weapons. And Harun Farocki, the filmmaker, has made this the subject of 3 films, which is called I/Machine 1, 2, 3. To put it dialectically, the so-called image has to become a non-image first before it can reappear on the interface of your computers. During its media being, during transmission, there is nothing like an image at all in its infra-technical existence. Before and while the technical image finally becomes again an image on some user interface, as it happens now, before that happens, its coming into being and existence is radically non-iconic. This intermediary state, and this is the term medium itself, this intermediary state is no simple pre-existence of the final image, but is its truly technological alternative, which deserves epistemic attention. To grasp this non-visible other of the image inside technology, it requires a different set of technical terms to describe it, rather than the traditional transcendent signifier image. By what can this be replaced, the traditional image? By terms like bijective mapping or the one-line scanning in electronics, which transforms the optical image into media operations. So mathematics and electronics actually offers alternative terms which are more precise than the transcendent cultural anthropocentric signifier image. And this is a proposition from media archaeology to radically replace signifiers like image or time by more precise vocabulary, the technical terms which are used in computational science and in electronics, because they offer those more precise terms. In the previous media configurations, the world appears as already directed at human senses. But the specificity of most of the technical configurations of optical communication media, in Aristotelian terms, that would be its causa materialis, the material of media, the media matter, or its software causa formalis, or its transmissional causa finalis, and its communicative causa efficiens. Those are the Latin translations of Aristotle's terms. They can only be explained by their anthropocentric, intentional orientation at human visual perception, like Edmund Husserl has described it. But the evidence of an implicit inner technical image knowledge, which is McLuhan's medium message, is revealed by its inner technical existence as operation only, a technical iconologos which has escaped visual culture with its focus on iconology so far. Against the dominant screen essentialism of cultural and visual studies, that is how Nick Montfort named it, media archaeology radically focuses on the material and the technological processes that produce so-called images before they become visual on optical interfaces like the computer screen. As can be demonstrated by the case of the so-called hidden surface algorithm in computer graphics, the digital image is not primarily structured by vision anymore, but by a theory of the nature of objects, a computational ontology for which the rendered image is only one of many possible expressions. And for a moment, I think for reasons of time, I skip my little part on radar vision and come directly to the question of visual knowledge, machine vision, and artificial intelligence, because there are not too many minutes left. Visual interfaces enact monitoring in all senses, while its technical machinery retreats into total opaqueness, into invisibility. When you see me now and hear me now, you actually do not see what happens in order that you can see me at all inside technology. But visual human-machine interfaces, they become redundant in direct machine-to-machine communication, resulting in an ultimate transparency. Digital calculation does not refer to the imaginary nor to a world outside anymore. The physical reality behind the screen is circuitry and electric current only. Human image recognition is always prefigured by cultural iconology already. We are educated like this from the moment we are born. Similar or parallel to the always already musical perception of sonic image signals. But for immediate signal processing in operative rather than culturally performative context, such a military or industrial image recognition, only machine vision can get rid of the hermeneutic trap to which a human placed at the monitor as visual interface is subject. We are always, as humans, trapped by seeing optical visual signals as somehow image-like. We are culturally trained to see it as an image. But another computer would see at those signals without having an idea of an image. As expressed in several video installations, I mentioned it already, film director Harun Farocki once made this the subject of his films itself. Once surveillance cameras are coupled to non-human pattern recognition systems, like Rosenblatt's perceptron from 1958, which was the first image figure character recognizing neural net. Like this, a different kind of understanding images by media takes place. It's not only humans anymore who have an understanding of what we call images. There's a different understanding by the machine itself. The goal behind the production of technical images may have been phenomenologically prefigured by photography, but is now extended beyond it, not only to record and preserve, but also to recognize, deceive, and conceal. Until the arrival of artificial intelligence by artificial neural nets and so-called deep machine learning, it has only been the human who finally transforms the perception of optical signals into the meaningful recognition of an image in the cultural sense. But with the convolutional if-then structure of computer algorithms that improve automatically through experience, this is machine learning, recursive machine learning implements the neurocybernetic feedback mechanism, which has been a privilege of human visual perception so far, now into machine vision. With the arrival of machine cognition and deep machine learning, the so-called image as a concept no longer makes sense from the human point of perception only. The technical image as medium is redefined by machine vision itself. In a media archaeological epistemology, The dramatic difference between human vision and machine imaging should not be smoothed or humanized by the media theatrical scenes of visual interfaces, such as the computer screen, but it rather should be drastically irritated here. I think there should be a screen interface aesthetics which irritates human vision. You should now see not me as a natural image of a talking lecturer, but you should be irritated and be aware that it is not me that you see, it's a configuration of pixels that you see, which have been radically mathematized. Where the electronic video image has no human producer and is even devoid of human intention, and where it is not viewed by human beings but analyzed by automatic recognition software, a different aesthesis perception of the image arises, which is generative aesthetics in epistemological terms. And now I come to my final words. From the moment of sampling and quantization, numérisation en français, of visual works of art, parallel to its human discourse, another gaze emerges, which is non-human in terms of iconology, but still cultural in terms of technology. Image recognition is not restricted to human neurons anymore. Artificial neural nets replace this privilege. The concern with technical images in return leads to an increased awareness of the technical essence of human visual perception itself in so-called neuromediality. Suddenly we realize that our image perception is computational already. Like the electronic image generation on the screen, neuronal processes react to visual signals in a direct manner by serially examining them in brief temporal intervals, while utilizing almost no, or rather ephemeral echo intermediary memory. The neural impulses that have been derived from visual perception are organized quasi-automatically into such features as edge, color, depth, and motion. That's how our brain processes images. At what level does a set of data, a format, become then an image at all? Does a visual configuration of optical signals for human perception turn into an image by verbal description only, ekphrasis, old Greek term, or is the image independent from human awareness already? As it has been defined by Hermann von Helmholtz, the physiologist in the 19th century, for musical sensation and optical character recognition, it is only by cognition that such data become what we call an image. Without human interpretation of certain visual patterns, the image would just be a cluster of data. Optical signals become information in the eye of the beholder only, while the computer can deal with the symbolical analysis of physical data only, not with the imaginary. There is the real, the technical real, the material real, and the logical symbolical, to use Jacques Lacan's terms, but there is no imaginary for the digital image, for the computer. But with machine learning and deep machine learning, computing starts to emulate the human quality of image perception itself, and that is the ultimate victory of image anthropocentrism in its very disappearance. Thank you for your attention of my somewhat complicated thoughts. Maybe we can have a critical or relaxed discussion now. And I think it will take 1 minute just to place the camera so I can see you on the screen and sit down and relax. So we meet again in a minute and hopefully have a discussion.
No problem, Professor Ernst. Thank you so much. I will use the time, I will give you time and say a few words. This was, I believe, the perfect way to start this new series of seminars. Professor Ernst kindly recollected the summer school organized by the University of Turin and by CESPEC in September 12, 19. It was about digital images, and I remember a really interesting exchange between Alberto Romele, who's an hermeneutician of digital images, and Professor Ernst, who was sharing this media theoretical view of the paradoxes of an anthropologic approach to digital imaging. I would also say that we are profoundly sympathetic with what he said. The title of this series of seminar was understood by Professor Lingua in a problematic way, so to say. So we absolutely share the critical stance towards a linear, chronological, development-like idea of the evolution of digital images. And also, we are very excited to hear about the paradoxes and the difficulties we encounter when we try to think anthropologically about digital images. I believe no one could have expressed better such paradoxical nature of our relationship with digital images and our understanding of digital images than Professor Ernst. Before starting the debate, since I would like to give some more moments to the public to recollect their ideas, and to all the participants, of course, I would like to use this chance to thank some people who made this all possible. First of all, Professor Gemma Serrano, the director of the Département d'Humanisme Numérique, who of course endorsed this whole project and worked with us in organizing this series of seminars. Again, I would like to thank the staff, the technical staff, namely Marca Rakotovao, the digital responsible of the department, Marca Arenas Beneito et Sarah Adnas, the audiovisual team of the Collège, and Nathalie Moisan, the chief of communication of the Collège. They helped us really a great deal, and I would like to thank them publicly. And of course, Jacopo Bodini, who will help me moderate the debate. So questions are absolutely open. I see there is a first request by Denise Wagner, and I leave her the stage. Thank you. We can see. We can. You have to turn on your microphone. Thank you.
Bonjour. Bonjour. Bonjour à tout le monde et merci beaucoup. C'est une paradoxe à ce moment d'écouter un texte de l'image digitale dans une Zoom-conférence très digitale. Pardonnez-moi, mais il faut que je change à l'anglais. So it's talking about the image. I think it would have been great if you would make an image or stop for a moment, and I'm sure we would all have created a different image because it depends on the our individual set for the speed of our internet connection. So we would all have created a different image of Professor Ernst talking in his talk. My question is, Professor Ernst, as we have all those, the digital image or the digital image is not material in any way anymore. Only if we take a still that we make kind of a screenshot at a certain moment, but still it's the collection of a collection, of data that you, as you explained. And my question is kind of more philosophical or Bildphilosophie. philosophy of the image, as the image was produced because first there was this idea, the eidos, and then we tried to translate the eidos into an image. And how is it with the digitalization? It could be that we kind of go the other way around, so that we go from a concrete image back to the eidos and dematerialize it, everything again. So we do the recurse way, looking at it in a more philosophical way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. This is an impressive argument to remind of the Platonic idea that there is the idea before the eidos. Of course, our word idea, or in French, l'idée, or the Old Greek eidos, is linked to the idea of the visual. It is literally, etymologically, the word is linked to the visual, but there is an abstract vision in the beginning. Although sometimes I tend to be Platonic, and at that point I would not be Platonic, because I think now that has been the old European Occidental tradition, that before the image there is the idea of the image. And most artists and painters would maybe agree. And even the fact that there is a drawing of a picture or a design, and like the wonderful Leonardo and others, they first design it, they have an idea, and then they produce a picture. That is the old European tradition, of which I feel very much a part. But with computer graphics, something different happens. There is suddenly an algorithm without any visual idea anymore. I think of the Benoit Mandelbrot pictures, the fractal images in computing. Now, there has no idea of what it looks. It has been a mathematical formula. It has been a mathematical idea of fractal numbers. And they can be computed by humans, but we then only have mathematical formulas. Once they are programmed to the computer and visualized by a computer script, it suddenly became clear that inside mathematics, there is an implicit image, which is the beauty of the fractals. And suddenly it became clear to humans that there is a mathematical elegance in these formulas, but it started from mathematics. And only with the help of the computer, this mathematics could be visualized, and that triggered the human fascination with the fractal images. So I think something which is both Platonic and non-Platonic takes place. If the mathematics suddenly is there first, that is what I call the implicit image. For the computer, there's only the implicit image. It's a conceptual thing, but it's not a visual thing. It's not an eidos anymore. It's a mathematical algebraic construction. And so that's why I see by the computer, we are not simply 2,500 years after Old Greek image philosophy, but the computer makes us rethink this tradition in a very radical way, which could rather be linked to Pythagoras' approach to the world rather than Plato. I know they both had a debate in Antiquity. But thank you very much for this impressive suggestion. Yes, I took notes.
I believe Jacopo Bodini has some questions from our viewers on YouTube.
Yes, thank you, Alessandro, and thank you, Ernst. I will read the question directly, since there are two questions, and they're both around the last part of the talk, and specifically the subject of machine vision. So the first one is, thank you so much, Professor Ernst. I didn't understand what you think about the possibility of machine vision, i.e. the vision from the point of view of the machine, and how can we reflect about this notion in a non-anthropocentric way? And then there is another question asking, thanking you again, and then thank you for this technological perspective on image theory. And I keep reading. You have spoken of machines media understanding images. When considering image perception by humans, we could distinguish between the human identifying the context, the contents of the image, and the understanding the image in an hermeneutical sense. Do you see a possibility of applying this distinction on a machine vision? Could be there a technological alternative to the understanding of images that exceeds the sheer identification of what the image shows? So these are the question that I collected from our viewers on YouTube. Thank you. I will give you the.
Thank you for both echoes. Well, on the one hand, on machine vision, it's really a risky phenomenon which now emerges with machine vision. It's very popular now, as we know. It's so critical because it emulates the human vision. The idea of machine vision is to emulate the way humans perceive images, the way humans paint images. Now we have all those playful computer programs in artificial intelligence where a new painting of Van Gogh can be produced, which looks like it was drawn by Van Gogh himself and others. So the machine erases the difference between machine and human, because suddenly the machine seems to have an image idea like humans. But the more it's critical because it completely dissimulates how radically other is the machine when producing such a so-called image in machine intelligence. Because if you look what happens in the machine, what happens in the artificial neural nets, what is the data processing in electronics? It has nothing to do with the way humans perceive images. So it looks like as if the computer now can emulate human vision, but actually it is the radical other of the human vision. That's I see there is a point where we have to become critical of the new myth of machine intelligence and machine vision. This is to answer the first. And to the second remark, it's a very interesting and challenging question whether there could be something like a machine hermeneutics. We would traditionally say hermeneutics, image understanding, textual interpretation. This is something for the human. The machine can do many things, but the machine could never be hermeneutic. But once we admit that maybe the machine can never be hermeneutic in the human sense, because that depends on cultural training and all kinds of preconditions, bodily conditions. But to say that hermeneutics can be non-human, there can be an understanding which is non-human and still understanding. It's worth to be recognized. And when we see how a machine looks at an image, we learn something about what an essence of an image is, which we would never learn as long as only humans talk about images. So I would go so far to say the hermeneutics should not be reserved to the human, but we should admit, again, alluding to Bogus, an alien hermeneutics by the machine. That would be an understanding, that would be an identification, like the ID is already part of the internet recognizing practice. So I would rather turn it into something productive and say we have to rethink the notion of hermeneutics in a transhuman or even post-human hermeneutics that would enrich our cultural European Occidental tradition. Thank you for this.
Thank you, Professor Ernst. If someone wants to ask a question, you can simply write in the chat or just turn on your screen or raise your hand through the Zoom application. So let us know. There was a question by Jacopo Bodini in person this time, by himself.
Yes, thank you, Alessandro. I will now represent myself, even if it's not myself. And I would say that the question starts from this point and from the weird moment I had before in reading the question on YouTube. Now you have to know that the retransmission on YouTube of this talk is like 30 seconds later. So I was seeing the images of before and I was hearing myself talking and I didn't see myself. So I was exactly in this disturbance, in this perturbation of the digital illusion. And I was in the paradox. And I think it's the main point, I would say, that interests me in this question. Because what you said about disturbing the reproduction of the image, not the reproduction, but we could say the reconstruction, it's more accurate, of the image, the digital image, remind me of many previous the digital, I would say, attempts in the history of art to disturb and precisely unveiling, revealing, deceiving, or disappointing the viewer by showing the machinery of the vision. I'm thinking in particular to Lyotard. Lyotard could be very interesting for this topic, not only because of this, but his main work was precisely discours figure, and this relation in between image and text, image and calculus in this case is very interesting. And the point is that it is precisely in the gap in between the two that we can find, he says, a desire. If we want to go outside the Lyotard point of view, we could say we find a relation. We find a relation. So my question would be like this. We always had these relations with image to create other relations. Images were there to let us creating or exploiting or proposing new kind of relations in between many different aspects. And the point of showing the machinery of the image allowed us to go beyond the symbolic, I would say, using Lacan, dimension of the relations, or the imaginary dimension of the relation, and going through the realm of these relations. And now I think that on the one hand, images has always been, or then we could argue on that, images or the surface hosting images. So now they are screens. We could say previous form of screens or previous form of support. There's always been interfaces that allow this relation. But in order to get into the real of this relation, we need this gap. We need the gap that the interface provides, the gap that is in putting in communication, but also in all the process that this put in communication, putting in relation demands. And so my question would be then, so this need of today's digital image to reconvert another time in image, in the end, this victory of the image in its disappearance could be linked to the necessity of a sort of interface into different dimension in order to establish this relation. But the main point, the main discontinuity between digital images and previous images, despite this continuity I tried to point out, would be then that we are now entering a different kind of relations. And as you were saying the last part of your question before, I really agree on that. A relation that can take into account also non-human elements, as it has always been, but non-human elements today are certainly more complex and more interactive than before. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacopo Bodini. There are at least 4 interesting arguments which you explained, to which I want to answer. But before I will answer, just a little remark. Originally, it was planned that we have this conference in real presence in Paris. And the conference is on visibility. What happens now is, at the moment, I see Jacopo Bodini. That's the only face I see. Under Zoom, I see 15 or 20 names. The names all hide behind the black frame, which Zoom allows. So it's the radical non-visibility of my audience or of the members of this colloquium. Suddenly Zoom offers something which could never happen in a real conference. You could leave the room and go, but then I would not have the illusion that I communicate with you. If you leave the room, the conference room, I know for some reason you are not there, and I do not try to communicate. Here I try to communicate with members of this conference. I just see the name and they hide behind the digital interface, which is the non-visibility, for which Zoom invites. Zoom invites for hiding behind the blackness of the screen. So I have to say I'm irritated, but in a positive way. I'm irritated because it reminds me that this is not human communication which takes place now. And that brings me back to Jacopo Bodini's first argument. I already know, when you see me, you see already my past. Because digital calculation, different from live transmission with a traditional television camera or video camera would be transmission of optical signals electronically with the speed of light itself. Electromagnetic waves propagate with the speed of light. So you would be in touch with my real presence in terms of time. The time indexical trace and authenticity of the present would be preserved, even in analog optical television video transmission. But with the digital, as Bodini said, digital means the computer has to calculate the image, and calculation takes time. And there are all little delays which happen, cache memory, intermediary memory in the processors, which takes place in computers. So we already are not in the present. We don't share the same present. So that's very irritating because the image seems to suggest immediacy, but it's not. It's not immediate. So the temporality of the digital image is already a big difference to the traditional image which we know. Now, to come to the second point, the digital images, I'm glad that Jacopo Bodini reminded us of that. It's not a reproduction anymore. It's not, in Walter Benjamin's famous terms, a technical image reproduction anymore, but it is a recreation, which is a different thing, because the computer has to recreate my image. I'm scanned, I'm digitized, and the computer compresses my image in order to make this temporal delay as small as possible. And then he has to reinvent how my complete image looks and to produce it on your screen. So we are beyond Walter Benjamin on the work of art in the age of digital reproduction. It's different from the photographic reproduction or the cinematographic optical image reproduction. It's now, it's a reinvention or it's a new construction. So that makes it a big difference, of which we have to be aware. Now to the next point, you are right, Jacopo, that I'm not arguing against the art historical idea of the image. It's rather saying that we are not from the ancient image to the digital image, but there is a recursion. The computer is a recursion of Alberti's perspective image, which in the Renaissance for the first time constructed a visual impression from a geometrical mathematical grid. This was so radical. Suddenly the early Renaissance was already pre-digital in a way. And it's closer to our present digital image, much closer than other more recent image traditions. So the whole temporality of art history is suddenly mixed and redefined by the digital image. And then there is Lyotard. I wonder if it makes sense, analytic sense, to separate the image and the text, or the language and the image, like many others do it as well. But now I relate to Willem Flusser, whom I mentioned several times. He says, no, the moment the image itself is textualized, or alphabetized, because every bit, every pixel is a technical alphabetization of the image. Suddenly the image itself becomes text. So there is no categorical dichotomy between the image and text anymore, but a new victory of textuality over the image. That is the technical or computational image. So I think we have to go beyond those dichotomical discussion and separation of the image and the text, or literature and the visual arts, which has been dominating the discussions of the last centuries. The computer is already one step further. For that, Willem Flusser's philosophy is very rich. Now, finally, there is, I think if I understood you right, I would as well say the interface, the function of the computer monitor, the visual computer interface, is actually not to link us, our images, to each other, but rather to irritate us, to show that the interface separates us. It does not link us, but it separates us, because it's the radical otherness of the computational image which appears on screen. It's radically other from me sitting here in front of the camera. So maybe even for the interface aesthetics, industry, software industry, computer industry tries to make the image resolution better and better and better. So we forget about that it's a technical interface at all. But a different aesthetics of the interface might be one which actually radically irritates us by showing the otherness of the digital image. That could be a completely different aesthetic of the visual interface. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Ernst. I just I didn't want to take too much time in asking my question, so I went a bit fast on Lyotard. But my point was precisely that Lyotard says something that is very similar to Flusser, that the image has been textual for a long time in the history of Western culture. So I think there's something to explore there in a weird but interesting connection. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
There is a question by Denise Wagner, who kindly wrote it in the chat, but I will ask her to weigh in directly and discuss with Professor Ernst.
Okay. I would like to come back to the hermeneutic point that you made before, that hermeneutics can be created by non-humans. And I was wondering, still the set of the meaning is created by humans. Because when we think of the deep machine learning, it's the programmer that kind of sets the cluster, saying like, okay, now we make a collection of, let's say, trees, for example, and kind of shows the algorithm or trains the algorithm to identify trees between other objects in an image. And that's how he kind of learns, like actually like little kids, when you train them the words, what they see, and that's the word what you see. So right now, this is what the algorithm does. And my question is, if the computer doesn't, if machinery doesn't need us to create images, is it also be possible, like in the next future step, whenever, that they also can create the meaning? Or does it need someone to, what was just mentioned, someone to create text that links the text with the image in kind of Flusser's terms?
Yeah. You mentioned the term meaning. It's like with the term hermeneutics itself. We automatically associate the human sense of what for humans is meaning, of what makes sense for humans. Now, in machine learning, we have two families, two traditions. The one is the computer still needs training by humans. That would there are thousands of people who earn their money, even at this moment, by tagging images to train the computer, that when the computer sees some signals, for humans, it has the meaning of a tree. And if it's humans who take a lot of internet images, they tag it verbally and say, this is a tree. And by that, they train the computer to get an idea of what humans associate with a tree. Now, that would be a very that would be transhuman, because it would just be an extension of the human image tradition by the computer, this training. That would be the sort of the soft version of machine learning. But the more radical version of machine learning is the untrained one. You have one neural net and you let it fight against another neural net. And they, in between, two computers or two neural nets actually learn from each other how to identify something which has a pattern or something. And this untrained, so-called unsupervised machine learning is the one which becomes autonomous from the human culture. It becomes, in a way, non-cultural in terms of image tradition. It's still cultural because it's a technological thing, but it's not linked to the human image culture anymore. And now we come to this miraculous expression, deep machine learning. It's not about machine learning anymore, like in the classical cybernetic times in the 1960s or artificial intelligence of the 1970s, but now it's called deep machine learning. What is this deep? Deep sounds like a hermeneutic term. There is a deep meaning behind the apparent surface. The deep means, in terms of computational informatics, there are several layers, computational neural nets, which are layered one upon another, and each layer has a task. The one detects edges in an image, the other detects colors in an image, the other detects shapes and things like that. And now this layering is something like the idea of cultural hermeneutics, which normally coming from biblical studies means behind the apparent meaning of a text, there is a second meaning and a third meaning that was all trained with reading the Bible. Everything the Bible says in the New or Old Testament has a second and a third meaning. That this layering was hermeneutics. Now this layering becomes computational in a very precise sense, but the fact that it's called deep machine learning already indicates that humans suddenly recognize, and even computational scientists recognize, that the image hermeneutics might be extended to hermeneutics performed by the computer, and that's why we call it deep machine learning. And then it's not transhuman anymore, but post-human. In theory, there is an interesting debate. What separates the transhuman from the post-human? And with the unsupervised, untrained neural nets, we are already post-human. That is a post-human idea of the image, while the other is simply a transhuman one.
I think it was the maybe the untrained machine learning, when they had this case in the USA with Google, when the algorithm couldn't, when you were looking for, let's say, apes, and they had pictures shown of colored people, which of course got into racial discrimination and made a case against Google. So they had to reframe this algorithm. So
yeah, that's an interesting. Yeah,
there must be a control. Some, like, you can't let them off the leash right now and get them into computing themselves. Like somewhere there must be still a controlling.
Yeah. When you say there must be a control, I have to oppose as a media theorist, because of course with every new technology, human culture always reacted, no, this is becoming dangerous. There was always the fear that the machines become autonomous, the robots take over, or the weaving machines actually. No, there must be control. And the current discourse on, say, there is racial discrimination happening. This is a very human culture reductionist way of looking at what happens. I know it's a provocation, but when I say there is the cold media archaeological gaze, says no, the machine does not know those ethical problems. The machine just says it's colored, it's dark color, and this is a criterion. And I think media archaeology allows the machine to do its thing without interrupting it and saying, no, this is ethically not correct. Because epistemologically, we have to let the machine do their things and see what kind of other knowledge might be revealed if we let the machine perform. I know this is now a very critical debate, and I would have discussions with a lot of Anglo-American colleagues on that. But I think the liberative aspect of media theory is that it lets the machine find its own logos, its own knowledge, and humans might learn from the machine that the machine knows something about images which we did not know before. And if we stop the machine because it's ethically not correct or politically not correct, then we let not the machine develop and show us its machine knowledge. It's maybe risky, or maybe this is something which we are only allowed to do in the academic context, but at least the academic context should be the place where we should never say we have to forbid the machine to do this. Okay, critical point.
Is there any other question? So if not, I can maybe, yeah, there is Francesco Pisano.
Thank you, Professor Ernst. So, concerning the relationship between text and image, the way we spoke about text until now reminded me sometimes of the characteristica universalis of Leibniz, some sort of originary alphabet that could translate every single instance of an image. So, my question is, do you think that the current state of affairs in which the digital text cannot transmit all the properties, for instance, the immediacy of the claim to immediacy that each image seems to imply, it's linked to the present state of technology, or do you see an obstacle in principle to the idea that there is a complete translation of the experience of an image, since this experience is deeply tied with indexicality and present temporality and space. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for this very interesting point, and reminding us of the Leibniz Characteristica Universalis. Actually, Leibniz, as we know, was the first one to construct as a design. He did not build it mechanically, but he made a design of the first binary computing machine, because he wanted to reduce the characters even to only 2, 0 and 1. He was influenced by Chinese yin and yang, as we know, and he designed this first binary computer machine. And your remark was on the fact that what happens when the word is translated or reduced to those characters, could digitization and the binary alphabet sort of translate more or less the whole world into the binary regime? That is actually what there is Leibniz. On the one hand, there is a media artist, Erkki Kureniemi in Finland, who has been recently rediscovered. He wrote a text on computation as the great transcription, that the world is transcribed by the binary computer into digital numbers. Now, he calls this the great transcription. That is what we now call the digitization, the universal general digitization, which actually is even speeded up by the corona crisis, because now we are radically digitizing things which were not digital before, like an academic conference, like now. Okay, but you rightly, Francesco Pisano, you rightly say the question should not be, is this a universal digitization taking place, but what gets lost in this translation, to allude to this film title. And now we have to be, one could speculate philosophically about this a lot. But that's our media archaeology here in the Berlin School of Media Science. We say we have to look closely at what happens technologically in what we call digitization. Of course, the digitizing of an analog signal is always time discrete. The quantization which takes place means that parts of the signal quality get lost in time discrete sampling. So the world is lost by digitization. But to that challenge, people like Claude Shannon and Nyquist developed a mathematical answer. They say once you sample a signal with twice the highest frequency of its signals compartments, then the signal can be originally reproduced. That's the sampling theorem. So that's a very interesting moment. What do we lose by digitization? Or can digitization even emulate the analog? And the sampling theorem claims it does. I would say, as a radical media archaeologist, if we really look at what happens, and every engineer would agree, no, always the signal is partly lost. The digitization is a sacrifice. We sacrifice aspects of the world. And there are all kinds of errors and minimizations and reductions. And that's why we have to be critical of this universal claim. We should even have more digitization. German politicians now in the corona crisis in this year, they keep saying Germany has to become even more digital. And the corona crisis with home office and digital transmission and electronic digital teaching and university Zoom conferences, we should have more of that. As if the virus now has helped digitization to become the general victory. And that's the moment where we have to become very critical, like you asked the question, what gets lost by digitization? I just would propose that when answering this question, one should first look at what happens technologically, really in terms of computation, very precise, and then start to develop the more philosophical, aesthetic, epistemic, and historical questions, which would then open to a very interesting discussion. Thank you for this.
Thank you, Francesco. Thank you, Professor Ernst. I'm afraid our time is up. We must
go to lunch now.
Conclude. Yeah, we must go to lunch. That won't be digitized for now. And Professor, thank you so much. I will keep my questions for our next meeting, hopefully soon enough. And thank you for this beautiful presentation and for the very, very interesting exchange.
Thank you for this opportunity, and thank you for this very interesting discussion, and to the organizers who are the precondition for that. Thank you. Ciao, ciao.
Thank you.
Yes. Au revoir.
Au revoir. And I would just like to remind that our next meeting will be on December 18 from 2 in the afternoon to 5. And our speakers will be Emanuele Coccia and Antonio Lucci. It will be in French, not in English. So thank you all for listening to us. Merci à tous et à toutes. Et à la prochaine fois. Au revoir.